Wait, who tattoos a damn compass on their spine? That's what triggered the laughter. She hadn't even said a word, just bent down to pick up a map. But under the light, her shirt pulled just enough to reveal it. A faded compass. Coordinates etched in black along her spine like a scar from another war. They laughed. One officer hit the record, but the general didn't laugh. He froze, eyes locked, breath shallow. Because of those numbers, they were classified, forgotten, and once they saved his life. No one knew the woman they mocked had rewritten battlefield maps by hand, or that the only reason she was alive was because they left her behind. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. This is Veteran Biker. Subscribe for stories that don't just speak, they haunt. The envelope was plain. No insignia, no return address, just her name written in military block letters, E. Keene. Eliza stared at it under the yellow porch light, heart unmoved. She had opened so many like it in her life. Draft notices, post-discharge amendments, death reports. This one, however, bore a strange weight, not the kind that made your chest tighten, but the kind that made you sit down before opening it. Inside, one sheet of paper. Heavy stock, embossed seal faint in the corner. 3 lines typed: Strategic Command War Simulation Exercise, Observer Invitation, F4 Bunker, Pentagon Sublevel, Tabus Scenario. She didn't smile, didn't flinch, just folded it again, slid it back into the envelope, and left it on the kitchen table beside the old compass she hadn't touched in 20 years. The cab stopped at the curb in silence. Eliza stepped out and smoothed her shirt, a pale grey button-up, just pressed. The collar sat stiff and proud. She carried no bag, no credentials, just a folded map in her breast pocket, and eyes like someone who had already seen what people were pretending to prepare for. Security was standard. Metal detectors, ID scans, silent nods. One young soldier blinked at her twice before letting her pass, as if her presence triggered a memory he couldn't place. Sublevel F4 had the chill of overcompensation, concrete walls, LED lighting too cold for comfort, and silence too dense for peace. The simulation chamber was circular, lined with wraparound digital panels and a single central table. About 24 officers already milled about, young, polished, loud with nervous energy. Their name tags read like ROTC class lists: Weiss, Quinn, Dalton, Reyes. She didn't speak, just stood near the far wall, hands folded, watching the digital terrain scroll slowly around the chamber. Sand, cliffs, a desert battlefield abstracted in pixels. Looks like the janitor wandered in early, someone said near the coffee machine. Eliza heard it, didn't blink. Lieutenant Brandon Weiss leaned into his friend, chuckling behind his palm. Is that a notepad in her pocket? God, what is this, 1995? Their laughter was low but infectious. A couple of others joined in, eyes flicking toward the quiet woman by the wall. Then the map slipped. It had been resting against her elbow, folded in half until a subtle shift of weight sent it gliding to the floor. She bent to pick it up. That's when the room changed. The back of her shirt lifted slightly with the motion. Not much, just enough to expose a glimpse of skin, tanned, lined with age and something else. Ink, a dark faded compass etched along her lower spine, intertwined with a series of numbers looping down her back like the vertebrae had been replaced by coordinates. Weiss's voice cut through the low chatter. Wait, who tattoos a damn compass on their spine? Silence, then laughter. One officer leaned back in his chair. Navigation, Grandma! A younger one near the corner raised his phone, tapping record. B-roll for our recruitment video. They laughed louder now. Eliza stood up slowly, dusting off the map as if none of it had happened. She made no move to fix her shirt, no move to defend herself. Her silence held. And in that silence, General Maddox entered the room. He walked like someone who knew the weight of his own name. No announcements, no introduction. His very presence rerouted the room's posture. The laughter died instantly. He said nothing, just approached the table, glanced once around the room and nodded to the tech team. Begin Tabus scenario, default parameters. The lights dimmed. The terrain wrapped around the room sharpened. Wind simulation kicked in, just enough for realism. And suddenly they were no longer in DC, they were back in the desert. A facsimile, yes, but one accurate enough to trigger muscle memory in those who'd been. Eliza hadn't moved. She stared at the terrain with the stillness of someone memorizing every grain of sand. Weiss noticed her again, whispered to Quinn, "Bet she doesn't even know what Tabus is." But Eliza did. She had once crawled across that very strip of sand. She had once been left for dead there. 15 minutes into the simulation, a debate broke out about the extraction route. The AI suggested a corridor between two cliffs, Zone Z-26. Eliza's jaw tightened. She stepped forward quietly and placed a small piece of paper on the edge of the table. A tech looked up, confused. Z-26 is a trap, she said. No one responded. It wasn't her place. One of the captains cleared his throat. "Observer Keene, we'll kindly ask you to refrain from interfering." She turned slightly. "Then you'll kindly watch 22 men vanish into sand." That caught them. Maddox raised an eyebrow, approached. He picked up the paper, looked at the hand-drawn line, and then he saw it, the note in the margin. Confirmed deviation, 1980 recon mismatch. His breath caught. He looked up. She stood at ease, hands behind the back, unflinching. The back of her shirt had shifted again. The ink is visible. He squinted and froze, not in confusion, not in off the fence, in memory. His voice was barely a whisper. These numbers were classified. Someone laughed, unsure. "Sir?" But Maddox wasn't listening. He stepped closer, slowly, eyes locked on her spine. Only 3 people ever saw those coordinates. He stared longer, and his voice broke when he said, "They saved my life." The room didn't move. For a moment, no one even breathed. The laughter had died, but what replaced it wasn't silence. It was weight. Weight in the air, in their throats, in the look. General Maddox gave Eliza Keene. His hand still held the paper she had given him. The old coordinates, the handmade note, the familiar linework written in a script he'd last seen on a field report, sealed under a top-secret stamp. A second passed, then another. "Is that real?" Lieutenant Weiss asked quietly. Maddox didn't answer him. His eyes were still on her spine, the coordinates, the ink that shouldn't exist. Eliza turned her head slightly, finally acknowledging the room. She looked directly at Maddox. "I remember the moment we realized the satellite feed was wrong," she said calmly. "We were 2 miles off course. The extraction window collapsed before we even arrived. The only way out was through terrain that wasn't on any map, so I drew it." Maddox stared at her like she was a ghost. "You drew it on yourself," she nodded. "I didn't have paper. My partner was bleeding out. We were losing light. I used a signal mirror and a broken needle." Murmurs began to rise from the group. Someone tried to whisper, but the room acoustics carried everything. Why the hell would anyone do that? She was there. In Tabus, weren't there only 5 survivors? No, 4. The 5th was listed as Mia. Maddox exhaled slowly. Echo Ninewalker. That name hadn't been spoken aloud in decades, and when he said it, the weight in the room shifted again. Older officers stopped blinking. A tech near the screen looked like he'd seen something unholy. "You were Echo Ninewalker?" he asked. Eliza didn't reply. She didn't need to. He stepped closer to the map projection. The digital terrain flickered slightly as he tapped into the manual override. The area known as Z-26 expanded on screen. satellite lines, recon overlays. Maddox's fingers hovered over a control, hesitated, then pressed alternate pathways. Nothing appeared. He turned back to her. "How did you know?" "Because I walked it." She reached into her back pocket and unfolded the other half of the hand-drawn map. It was wrinkled, stained in one corner with something dark. She laid it gently beside the digital map. The room fell into unnatural quiet again. "Those paths don't show up on recon," she continued. "They only open when the sun hits at a specific angle. I crawled into one of the cracks when I was trying to shield my partner from heat stroke." Maddox swallowed. "And he didn't make it?" Eliza blinked. "He bled out 3 hours before evac. I couldn't carry him. I stayed with him anyway." A few of the officers looked down. Lieutenant Quinn stepped forward, voice tentative. "If you had this information, why wasn't it ever debriefed? Why isn't it in the archive?" Maddox answered for her. "Because Echo-9 Walker was never debriefed. She never recovered. We thought she was dead. She didn't die, no." But the file was closed. Eliza lifted the edge of her shirt slightly, exposing more of the ink. "I carried the record, because no one else would." The screen blinked again. Then something changed. The AI, reacting to her physical map being scanned in real time, overlaid her lines onto the topography. For the first time in 4 decades, the map adjusted. Z26 turned red. Hazard flagged. The alternate corridor blinked green. Viable. A young officer near the back whispered, "Holy hell." Maddox didn't look away. "What else are we missing?" Eliza's voice was steady. "I've seen 5 blind spots in the last 10 minutes. If this sim is based on the same faulty input we used in 1980, then we're training people to fail. Now people weren't whispering, they were watching. The mocking energy was gone. A new tension grew, one of embarrassment, of uncertainty, of fear. Maddox turned to the tech team. "Feed her map into the master input. Replace the Z-path schema. Label it Walker Delta." "Yes, sir." "Also, disable phone signals in this room. Effective immediately." Lieutenant Weiss glanced at his phone guiltily. Maddox looked directly at him. "Delete the footage." Weiss fumbled, then nodded. Eliza moved to the side of the table as the simulation recalibrated. Her eyes traced the digital terrain, matching it to memory. Someone finally asked, "Why did you come back?" She didn't answer at first. "Then, because they asked me to observe." A quiet pause. "And because I wanted to see if they'd still laugh." No one laughed now. Maddox said, "Your presence here is no longer observational. You're now part of the primary advisory group. You will brief the simulation team at 0900 tomorrow." Eliza inclined her head slightly. Understood. He looked at her for a long time, then spoke softly. "They didn't deserve to lose you, and we didn't deserve to forget you." She said nothing. But when she looked back at the projected terrain, her fingers tapped quietly against the table, counting something. Maybe distances, maybe losses, maybe both. Behind her, no one whispered anymore. The lights in the simulation room dimmed once more as the updated map took over the main display. The terrain shifted subtly but decisively. Ridges moved, valleys narrowed, one path vanished altogether. A single blinking green line remained, marked Walker Delta. Eliza stood quietly as the officers and analysts stared, some with open mouths, some with folded arms and furrowed brows, as if their training had just been turned upside down. She stepped closer to the table and pointed at a spot just south of the blinking line. "This is where the evac team landed. A dust storm blew in from the northwest, and the signal window could collapse. We had no comms, no flares. They couldn't see us." Lieutenant Dalton frowned. "Why didn't you move to high ground?" "We tried. My partner lost too much blood. I wasn't going to leave him behind." General Maddox, arms crossed, watched her, not just as a commanding officer, but as a man remembering something he had locked away for decades. She continued, Voice even, matter of fact. I mapped every viable direction by feel, boot treads, compass shadow angles. I marked it all on my body, because that was the only thing guaranteed to still be with me. The officers in the room remained silent. Lieutenant Quinn shifted uncomfortably. Techs began pulling overlays from archived satellite data. For the first time, Eliza's sketched route aligned perfectly with a faint ridge barely captured by outdated recon. The AI flagged it as a low-visibility corridor, not previously charted. Maddox turned to the group. "This should have been found in 1981. Eliza corrected him. It was. But no one looked where they were told it didn't exist. She turned slightly, letting the light catch the ink on her back again. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Quinn stepped forward. "How did you survive after the evac window closed? Weren't you alone for days?" Eliza nodded. 73 hours. I rationed Wateran, chewed gauze for moisture, burned one of my boots to signal. Didn't work. Eventually I walked toward the sound of a chopper. Turns out it was miles off course. I blacked out before they saw me. Dalton asked, softer this time, "Did they know who you were?" Not until weeks later. I gave them the wrong name. Didn't trust the medics at first. They labeled me as a civilian. I didn't correct them. Maddox's jaw tightened. "You didn't trust your own extraction team. They never came back." The words fell like a slow punch. Weiss sat at the far edge of the room, shoulders tight. He hadn't spoken since deleting the video. Now he looked up. "So why return now? After all that, why this simulation?" Eliza walked toward the center of the room, boots quiet against the polished concrete. "Because they asked, and because the next time you get it wrong, it won't be a ghost you forget. It'll be a generation." That struck deeper than anyone expected. Maddox cleared his throat. "We're recalibrating all Tabus-based modules starting tonight. Your map will be cross-checked against recovered satellite logs and terrain memory simulations." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "Terrain memory?" "Tech that learns from cumulative footprints, even faded heat traces in old footage. New stuff." She gave a short nod. "Too bad it only works if someone survives long enough to feed it." Someone let out a breath through their nose, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Maddox stepped to the table and picked up her sketch again. He smoothed the edge. His hands were steady now. "I was one of the evac pilots for the backup team. I never knew why we couldn't find your signal, because the signal went dead 37 minutes before you arrived." She met his eyes. He was still alive when it did. He looked away first. Quinn asked quietly, "What was his name?" Eliza answered without hesitation. "Sergeant Damien Rourke, combat engineer, bled out in my arms, died before he turned 24. Someone whispered, "Rourke's name is on the Mia wall." "It shouldn't be," Eliza said. "He wasn't missing. I was with him." Another pause. "This one lasts longer, heavier." Maddox spoke into the stillness. "We'll update the records, both of you." Eliza said nothing, but her posture shifted just slightly, less guarded, not relaxed, just less alone. A tech waved from the corner. "General, sim recalibration complete. We're ready for a rerun if needed." Maddox nodded. "Run it again. New parameters. Keep Keene on console view." As the digital terrain began to scroll once more, Maddox leaned closer to her. "Would you consider joining the Advanced Field Integrity Review Board? I thought I was just an observer. That was before you rewrote the terrain." She gave a faint, dry smile. "Let me see how this run goes." He chuckled once, short and low. The second simulation began. This time, the troops followed the Walker Delta path. Everything moved smoothly, smoother than any of them expected. Halfway through the projection, one of the junior analysts spoke up. "Sir, the new path shaved 38 minutes off total evac time." Another added, "And casualties dropped by 62% in the adjusted scenario." Maddox glanced at Eliza. She didn't gloat, she just folded her arms and watched. He stepped forward, tapping the main screen. Start recording. Label this version Echo Revision 1. This is now the new standard. Weiss slowly stood. His voice wasn't smug anymore, it wasn't sarcastic, it was quiet. I owe you an apology. She turned her head, looked at him without blinking. You owe Sergeant Rourke one. He nodded, visibly swallowing. She turned back to the screen. Let's make sure no one else ends up inked into their own history just to be believed. And the room kept watching, because no one could look away. The war game paused just after midnight. The simulation screens blinked to black, the room lights softening into a cool dim. Around the central table, a dozen officers stood in silence, still processing what they had witnessed. Even the chatter from the tech stations had faded into an unusual calm. Eliza Keene remained at her post, arms crossed, eyes on the last frame of the simulation, a digital evac point flashing green instead of red for the first time in over 40 years. General Maddox turned to her. I want you back here at 0800. We'll debrief in front of the senior review committee. Eliza gave a short nod. Will they listen this time? Maddox didn't answer. Instead, he gathered the updated terrain report and walked out the far door, trailed by aides. The room emptied gradually, officers filtering out in pairs or small groups. Weiss hesitated before following them. He looked back at Eliza once, as if he wanted to say more, but didn't. Only one officer remained behind with her, Lieutenant Sarah Quinn. She lingered by the edge of the room, unsure, clutching her tablet tightly against her chest. You really tattooed coordinates into your own back, Quinn said finally, with a needle and a mirror. There wasn't much else around. Quinn hesitated. I'm sorry we laughed. Eliza shrugged. You weren't the first. Quinn shifted awkwardly. It was cowardly, the way we acted. Some of us forgot that people who don't speak usually have the most to say. Eliza's gaze softened. Or maybe we just wait until it matters. Quinn managed a small smile. Well, it mattered tonight. The younger woman left a moment later, leaving Eliza alone in the room. She stayed for a long while. The next morning, the Pentagon's South Wing conference hall filled quickly. Rows of senior personnel, colonels, division heads, veterans from long-buried operations, sat under subdued lighting. The front screen displayed a static title, Stratcom Simulation Audit Tabas Revisions. General Maddox stood at the podium. We are here to re-evaluate a war game that has been running for decades, one that taught us how not to repeat the past. He paused. And yet we never asked whether the past we were simulating was correct. He turned toward the side entrance. Miss Keene, please. Eliza entered the room with the same quiet authority she'd brought the night before. No uniform, no rank, just the spine of someone who had earned them all and no longer needed to wear them. She placed a hard copy map on the table in front of her, next to a projection remote. Her voice, when she began, was steady. What you've been training on is a myth, well-structured, polished and convenient. But it's not what happened. She clicked the remote. On screen, two maps overlapped, the historical operation plan and her corrected field diagram. This was the real route, the one no one saw, the one no one wanted to see, because if you admit the map was wrong, you admit the mission was flawed. Whispers traveled through the rows, not loud, not defiant, just surprised. She clicked again. The screen changed to thermal recon overlays. We now know this corridor existed, barely visible to satellite, but consistent in ground scans. These were first recorded in 882, never reviewed because the operation was declared closed. One colonel raised a hand. Why weren't you brought in earlier? Eliza's eyes didn't flinch. Because I was written off as missing. Because I didn't come back in uniform. Because I came back with the wrong name, on the wrong evac, and no one asked where I'd been. Another voice from the back. Why did you never speak up publicly? Who would have listened to someone they didn't know existed? Maddox stepped in. "That ends today." He turned to the screen. "The latest sim data is loaded in. The new scenario reduces casualty risk by over 60%. Timeline efficiency improves by 38 minutes. And field exposure drops dramatically." He gestured toward Eliza. "And all of it came from the hand of a woman we forgot." The hall was silent again. Eliza looked across the room at the younger officers scribbling notes, the veterans blinking back something harder than shame, the bureaucrats who never set foot on the sand. "If you want to run simulations that mean something," she said, "you have to be willing to admit that some ghosts come back with maps." No one responded. They just listened. After the briefing, the conference hall emptied slowly, officers filing out in tight clusters, speaking in hushed tones. Words like unprecedented and operational liability floated between shoulder boards and polished shoes, but no one approached Eliza. Not yet. She stood by the edge of the projector table, folding her copy of the terrain diagram with slow, precise hands. Maddox approached after a long pause, holding a folder. "They'll talk about this for weeks," he said. "Good, let them. You rattled a few cages. I didn't come to make them comfortable." Maddox allowed a small smile. He handed her the folder. "Debrief packet. Includes your temporary advisory status. You're officially reinstated for the duration of the review process. Didn't know I'd been removed. Technically, you were never logged out, just misplaced." She took the folder and tucked it under her arm. Convenient. Bureaucracy always is. They stood in silence a beat longer. Then Maddox asked more carefully, "What else are you carrying that we haven't seen yet?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached into the breast pocket of her shirt and pulled out a small, creased photograph. It showed two people, her and Sergeant Damien Rourke, kneeling beside a low dune, gear half covered in the sand, both smiling, both young. She handed it to him. "He deserves to be remembered right." Maddox looked at it for a long time. "He will be." Later that afternoon, Eliza was escorted to a smaller room deep in the internal archive wing. Here she would review recovered field recordings and cross-check them against her notes. She didn't need the digital interface, but the Pentagon demanded validation. The analyst waiting for her was young, early 30s maybe, dressed in quiet grays and blues. He stood as she entered. "Ms. Keene." "I'm Dr. Leo Branner, Archival Systems Lead." "Doctor? Didn't know this was academic." "Half of modern war is academic," he said, not unkindly, "and half of what's buried here has never seen daylight." He motioned toward the wall display. A paused video hovered there, grainy black and white footage from a drone. This was recovered 2 years ago. The camera was on a recon drone that lost comms 3 days into Tabas. It picked up thermal trails that don't match any logged patrol. He hit play. The screen showed a desert stretch, choppy from wind distortion. After 10 seconds, a faint shape appeared. Small, slow-moving. "That's me," Eliza said. Branner looked at her. "How can you be sure?" She walked up to the display, pointed to the movement pattern. "See that stagger? That's when I tore the left boot's sole climbing out of the sinkhole. I walked unevenly for hours." He blinked, then nodded. "We only identified this trail last month. It lines up with your sketch, almost perfectly." She turned away from the screen. "It's not the first time I've walked alone and left a trail no one noticed." Branner looked down. "We're trying to change that." She sat, pulled out her notepad paper, not digital, and began comparing timestamps. 3 hours passed. During that time, they discovered 5 separate heat traces unlogged by the original recon team. 2 of them matched known survivors. 1 belonged to Rourke. The 5th, unknown. Eliza circled the 5th trail. This person walked east, away from the ridge, toward the canyon. That canyon was supposed to be empty. Was. That doesn't mean it stayed that way. Branner hesitated. "Do you think someone else made it out?" She tapped the paper gently. "Or didn't?" And no one knew. A beat passed. "Then I want to go down there." Branner blinked. "Ma'am?" If the terrain's still stable, I want clearance to revisit the Tabas region. He stared at her. You want to go back? I want to see what's been erased. He didn't answer. He just typed. That evening, Eliza sat in the Pentagon's visitor housing, a small, sparsely furnished room with the clinical stillness of a place designed not to be remembered. She unfolded her old map again, flattening it on the desk. Under the lamp, the ink glistened slightly from the pressure of age. The spine tattoo was never meant to be permanent, but it had lasted, not because of the ink, but because of what it marked. The line between memory and myth. She traced it once with her finger, remembering Rourke's breathing slowing beside her, the pulse in his wrist fading. She remembered the heat pressing down like a weight. The silence. Someone had to carry that silence forward. And she had. Her eyes drifted to the window. Outside, the Pentagon courtyard sat still, lit from below, casting long shadows upward. Somewhere below that structure, a copy of her drawing was being processed, categorized, and stripped of emotion before being inserted into a new version of truth. But at least it would be there. The knock came just before midnight. She opened the door to find Maddox standing alone, a sealed envelope in his hand. Authorization packet, he said. Preliminary approval for site recon. The final decision will come after a joint assessment. And you're telling me in person because I'm going with you. She raised an eyebrow. Didn't think you still traveled. For this? I'll walk if I have to. She took the envelope. Good, because I don't ride with cowards. He gave a dry chuckle. Then I'll try to earn the seat. She closed the door behind her. The map stayed open on the desk, the faded ink glowing quietly under the light. History at last is preparing to meet its witness face to face. The plane touched down on the edge of the desert just before dawn. Not a commercial jet, not a military transport, something in between. A leased government craft with no markings, no flags. Dust kicked up around the landing gear, caught by the wind that never quite slept in the high flats of eastern Iran. Eliza Keene stepped out first. She wore no uniform, only sand-colored cargo pants, and a field jacket zipped halfway. Her boots hit the tarmac like she'd never left it. A canvas bag was slung across her back. Inside, a printed copy of the map, the one she had drawn, the one now embedded in Pentagon archives. General Maddox followed behind her, squinting into the sun rising over the mountains. Two younger staffers flanked him, both equipped with terrain tablets and mobile relay packs. A local liaison waited beside a low beige jeep, nodding silently. It hasn't changed much, Eliza said, her voice neutral. Maddox studied the terrain. Low ridges, powdery dunes, stone outcrops in the distance. Feels smaller. It always does when you come back standing. They loaded into the vehicle and began the slow crawl across the terrain. The vehicle's tires bit into soft, dry soil. As they neared the site marked Delta Ingress on her map, Eliza leaned out, scanning the horizon lines with eyes honed decades ago. There, she said finally. Stop here. The vehicle rolled to a halt. She stepped out and walked alone for several meters. The others hung back, giving her space. The coordinates matched. The slope of the land, the shadow angle from the ridge. She stood where she had once crouched beside a dying man, carving lines into the dirt with a stick, trying to etch survival into dust. She knelt, ran her fingers through the ground. Nothing remained. Of course, time had no loyalty, but the shape of the land, the grooves, the tilt of incline, still whispered recognition. Maddox approached quietly. Is this it? This is where I started mapping. After the signal went dead, she unrolled the printed copy and pressed it flat against a rock. The younger staffers brought up their tablets. Band began scanning. Heat trace, magnetism, wind patterns. They'd measure everything. But Eliza had already done the hard part. She'd remembered. As the team began cataloguing, she walked further east. Her boots dragged slightly. She knew the ground would be unkind. After 20 minutes, she stopped, turned. He died here. Maddox, still standing near the first ridge, looked up. "Rourke? Yes, right here." I memorized the sound of his breath. Where it faded, I traced it against the wind so I wouldn't forget the way out. She closed her eyes. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about proving we'd been real. They stood in silence again. The wind pressed low. One of the staffers called out, "General, we found something. Buried metal fragment. 4 inches down. Looks like part of a comms unit." Maddox looked at Eliza. She nodded once. The fragment was unearthed carefully, corroded but identifiable. A piece of a signal transponder, the kind issued in the late 70s. The serial number is partially visible. "We'll send it to verification," the staffer said. Eliza stared at it. He held that in his hand. I remember the sound it made when he dropped it. They kept searching. At mid-afternoon, they discovered part of a boot sole. The trend matched military issue from the 1980 Tabas deployment. The staffers grew quiet, more deliberate. Then came the fabric, faded, bled into the sand, but unmistakable. A strip of olive drab cloth, half melted by time and sun. A tag fragment still clung to the seam, Rower. Eliza knelt beside it. She didn't touch it. "Bag it," she said softly, respectfully. They did. Back at base camp, satellite feeds confirmed that the Walker Delta corridor aligned with now detectable subsurface ridges. None of it was on the original recon data, not because the tech couldn't see it, but because no one had thought to look for terrain that contradicted the extraction narrative. Maddox sat at the edge of a folding table, watching Eliza sketch again, not from memory this time, but from the terrain. "You never stopped drawing maps," he said, "only now they let me sign them." He nodded. "I've requested Rourke's name be removed from the MIA registry. Full honors, good. That's overdue. And yours." She paused. "What about mine? Official correction. Service reinstatement. Posthumous status reversed." She blinked. "You're reversing my death? Seems only fair." She looked down, smiled once, not fully. "Then you'd better do it right." That night, they built a small fire at the edge of the first ridge. Not ceremonial, not official, just flame and quiet, and a bit of peace. Maddox poured 2 tin cups of water and handed her one. "To those we lost, and those we made invisible." They sat long into the night. Stars stretched above them in silence. A new map, still drying, rested between them, and across that map, drawn in her hand, was a faint circle, not for extraction, but for memory, a place where names could return, where silence finally ended. The flight back was quiet, not tense, just full. Eliza Keene sat by the window, eyes fixed on the clouds below, her fingers tracing a crease in the corner of her field notebook. Across the aisle, General Maddox reviewed the preliminary recon summary on a secure tablet. Neither of them spoke much. They didn't need to. The desert had said what needed saying. When they landed, a black SUV was waiting to take them to a private debriefing room just outside Arlington. No press, no ceremony, just 3 men in suits, 1 woman in uniform, and a table covered in files. The man at the center wore wire-rimmed glasses and a ring with an old intelligence insignia. He didn't introduce himself. "We've reviewed the findings," he said, "and the implications. Ms. Keene, your maps, hand-drawn or not, are now officially validated through 3 separate data sources: satellite drift, field artifact correlation, and post-evac drone telemetry." Eliza nodded once. The woman in uniform cleared her throat. "We'll be issuing an amended report to Congress and the Joint Records Commission. Sergeant Rourke's MIA status will be corrected. Full honors." Eliza kept her voice steady. "And the others?" The man with the ring leaned forward. "There were 4 other anomalies in your terrain memory. We're sending teams. If any of them result in confirmed remains, those names will be added to the recovery wall." She didn't blink. Make sure they're not just added. Make sure they're read. He paused. We'll consider it. Don't consider it, Maddox said. Do it. The room froze for a moment. Then the suits nodded. The rest of the week passed in a blur of closed-door meetings and technical briefings. Eliza was asked to sit in on 2 strategic simulations, this time as a senior terrain validation consultant. The same officers who once whispered now took notes when she spoke. She walked through the halls of the Pentagon, not as a ghost, but as someone reclaimed. One afternoon, as she passed a wide digital wall displaying a rotation of military honors, she stopped. A new slide appeared, Sergeant Damian Rourke, medal awarded posthumously. Citation, remained in position, injured during compromised extraction, protected partner from hostile exposure, died in service. Below it, another image appeared, Echo 9 Walker, field operative designation, status reinstated, primary contribution, terrain reconstruction from first-hand memory. She stared at it for a long moment, then walked on. 3 days later, she was approached by a young soldier near the south exit. He couldn't have been older than 23. "Ma'am," he said, clearing his throat nervously, "I just wanted to say thank you." She turned. "For what?" "For coming back. For not staying quiet. My sister's in recon. She trains with the updated Tabus protocol now. Says it's different. Says it finally makes sense." Eliza gave a nod. "Tell her to memorize the sound of the terrain, not just the shape." He blinked. "I don't understand." "She will." In the days that followed, she found herself returning often to a small room within the archive wing, not the simulation chamber, not the boardroom, a room with a desk, a lamp, and a wall-sized map where pins now mark recovered locations. She sat in the chair, pen in hand, sketching again, this time not just to prove something, but to preserve it. Dr. Branner stopped by once, left a note on her desk. "Memory is data. Yours just didn't degrade." She smiled faintly. One night late, Maddox joined her in the archive room. He stood at the map wall. "They've greenlit a project, mapping ghost trails, new department, field-to-memory protocol." She leaned back, catchy. "You're on the advisory board, whether you like it or not. Do I get a new chair? You get to choose your own nameplate." She laughed, the sound soft but real. Maddox studied the pins. "What's this one?" She stood and pointed to a pin off-center. "The one trail we couldn't trace. The 5th footprint. The one that went east." He narrowed his eyes. "You think someone else made it out?" "I don't know. But if they did, and they never came back, someone should still mark where they walked." Maddox looked at her, something like admiration behind his silence. She added, "I'm not the only ghost." "No," he said, "but you're the one who came back carrying a map." They stood there, 2 veterans in a room of recovered coordinates and overdue names, and between them, the distance left by silence began to close. 6 weeks after her return to the Pentagon, Eliza Keene received an envelope. It was cream-colored this time, thicker, embossed with a seal she hadn't seen since before Tabus. She opened it without emotion. Inside was a formal invitation, keynote address, Joint Tactical Simulation Summit, location Colorado Springs, date 2 weeks from now. Her name was listed in bold letters as the opening speaker. She stared at it for a moment, then put it aside. 2 hours later, she received a call from Maddox. "They want you to tell the story," he said. "The whole thing. That's not why I came back. No. But it's why you're still here." The summit was hosted in a cavernous auditorium nestled in the side of a military campus built into the mountain. Flags lined the outer walls. Inside, rows of officers, cadets, analysts, and veterans filled the seats. Eliza stood backstage, alone. A digital screen above her head counted down 2:59. Someone approached, a young woman in early 20s wearing the insignia of a simulation systems officer. "Miss Keene?" "Yes." The woman extended a small patch. It bore a minimalist design, 3 concentric lines forming a path, surrounded by a broken circle. Underneath it, a word, Echo. We designed a unit emblem for the Mapping Ghost Trails project. In your honor, Eliza took it, turning it in her hand. Thank you. The young officer hesitated, then said, My mother was in logistics. She used to tell me that most battlefield maps are drawn in silence. You proved that silence doesn't mean absence. Eliza nodded once. The woman left. The clock hit 0. She stepped onto the stage. The hall went quiet. Lights dimmed. She didn't start the war. She started with the silence. 43 years ago, I watched a man die beside me because a map was wrong. I survived. But survival isn't always proof. She told them what it meant to be missing without being gone. What does it cost to be a name not listed? A mark was not counted. She told them about Rourke, about drawing her first map with a compass shadow and a stick, about how every step she took after that was one she wasn't sure would matter. And then she told them what it meant to return, not just to a place, but to a version of the truth that had never been written. The room stayed silent until she finished, and when they stood, hundreds of them, it wasn't with applause, it was with stillness, a full minute, no phones, no words. Just the sound of breath and the weight of what she'd given back. Later that day, she sat alone at the base of a small granite memorial erected just outside the summit venue. It had been placed there a month earlier, dedicated to unnamed contributors to field operations. No names, just a phrase, not all maps are drawn in ink. She looked at it for a long time, then took a pen from her coat pocket and added a small mark in the corner, a circle, a line, Echo. That night she returned to her temporary quarters to find a message waiting. No sender, no subject, just coordinates. The sequence matched one of the unconfirmed trails from Tabas, the 5th trace, the one that headed east. She stared at it for a long time, then packed a bag. 3 days later, she arrived in a remote village on the Iranian plateau. Sparse houses, weathered stone, quiet. She found him at the edge of an open-air market, an old man sitting beneath a tattered awning, his posture too disciplined for someone selling fruit. He looked up, saw her, didn't speak, just nodded. They sat across from each other for a while. Then he pulled something from his coat, a fragment of cloth. Faded. Burnt at the edge, bearing a piece of the Echo unit insignia. I watched you walk west, he said finally. You never looked back. I couldn't carry both of you. I know. Silence passed between them, not sharp, not regretful, just aged. They told me I was dead, he said. They told me I didn't exist. He smiled. Looks like they were wrong twice. She smiled back. We should update the map. He nodded, and between them the coordinates began again, not for escape, but for memory and witness, for the places even silence couldn't erase. It took Eliza a week to return from the village, not because of distance, but because of the weight of what she had found. The man, he wouldn't give a name, said it no longer mattered, said some ghosts preferred to stay buried, but he let her take the cloth fragment, let her update the record. That, he said, was enough. When she returned to the US, there was a message waiting for her: Mapping Ghost Trails, Phase 2 Commencement. She had a desk now, not in a basement, not in a back room. A real desk in a new wing labeled Field Memory Integration. Her nameplate read Keene, Cartographic Oversight. Some of the staff called her Mom, some just nodded, but none questioned why she was there. The program's first initiative was a re-examination of 32 previously classified extractions that had involved ambiguous terrain loss. In every case, the official map differed from the survivor testimony. Eliza sat through each interview, sometimes silently. Sometimes she asked one question, always the right one. In the 4th case, a corporal from Somalia broke down crying. They said, I imagined it. said I was hallucinating when I described the rock slope, but I marked it. I carved it with my knife. Eliza placed a topographical overlay on the desk, marked with new LiDAR scans, a faint incline, a slope no one else had logged. You didn't imagine it, she said. He stared at her, breath caught. How do you know? She pulled a photograph from her pocket, her own field, her own slope, because I did the same thing. The program grew faster than expected. Within 3 months, they'd confirmed terrain deviations in 10 operations. Not all were mission critical, some were minor, but every deviation proved one thing: memory had value, not just as an anecdote, but as architecture. Eliza began building the Ghost Trail Archive, a digital repository cross-referenced by location, time, and unit. Each entry included both official records and first-hand revisions. Her rule was simple: no revision was erased. Every contradiction was preserved. She taught new analysts to hold 2 truths at once. Maddox visited often, though he never stayed long. "You're building something they can't ignore," he said one evening, standing by the wall map. "I'm not building," she said. "I'm remembering. They're the ones building." He nodded. "You ever think what might have happened if someone like you had been in the room 40 years ago?" She looked at him. "I was. They just didn't see me." One morning, she was approached by a civilian liaison from the Department of Veterans Affairs, a woman named Ingrid Marsh, stern, polished, precise. "Miss Keene, we'd like your assistance designing a new memorial, one specifically for those listed as Mia but later recovered or reclassified." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "Why now?" "Because we finally know how many were missed. And what kind of memorial would that be? One that admits silence was never the same as absence." Eliza took a long breath. "Then it better be made of stone, because paper forgets." The proposal came quickly: a new wing at the National Military Records Museum, an entire exhibit titled The Recovered Path. Eliza was asked to curate it. She refused. "Not my story," she said, "not just mine." But she offered one piece for display, a replica of the spine tattoo, etched onto the transparent slate. The coordinates are intact. The compass is still pointing. A small plaque beneath it read, "Drawn in silence, preserved in the skin." As the months passed, she became less of a mystery and more of a standard. Young cadets quoted her field notes. Simulation modules incorporated her paths. Officers who once laughed now built training protocols with her input. She was no longer the ghost. She was the map. But late at night, in the quiet of her office, she still traced the inked lines on her lower back, faint now with age, but real. A reminder that truth had once been hidden in plain sight, and only skin had remembered it. Then came the call, from the same village, a young man's voice. "He's gone," the voice said, "the man with the cloth. He died yesterday. Left this for you." They nailed it. It was a fragment of a notebook, dated. Pages handwritten in a sharp, angular script. Coordinates, notes, descriptions of terrain not known on any map. It matched no logged region, and yet it spoke of boots in the dust, of sun lines on cliffs, of movements in silence. Eliza read it twice, then a third time. Then she opened a new file in the archive, labeled it Echo, Final, and began tracing the lines. 1 month later, the exhibit opened. Hundreds came, survivors, historians, cadets. The replica tattoo stood at the center. Eliza stood off to the side, watching as people approached. A girl, maybe 15, touched the glass gently. "Did it hurt?" she asked softly. Eliza looked at her. "Yes, but not the way you think." The girl didn't ask for more. She just nodded, and Eliza nodded back. Behind them, the museum lights dimmed slightly as a spotlight passed over the slate, and the compass, silent, unmoving, seemed for just a moment to glow. The archive was never meant to become sacred, but somewhere between the first confirmed footprint and the 100th map correction, it did. Eliza Keene entered just after sunrise. The lights hummed quietly above her. Most of the building was still sleeping, but the wall of recorded trails glowed gently, pins and paths pulsing like veins. She moved slowly, one hand grazing the edge of a new map display. This one wasn't hers. It had come in 3 days ago from a woman in Montana. Retired now, but she'd served as a field mechanic during a covert mission in South America. She had drawn a river bend from memory and insisted the existing maps were wrong. The satellite data proved her right. Eliza had reviewed the sketch, confirmed the bend, and added it to the trail. There were now 73 paths in the archive that began as memory. 29 had resulted in corrections to official military cartography. The others waited. She didn't mind waiting. Behind her, a familiar voice spoke. Making ghosts walk again? She turned. Maddox stood in the doorway, a cup of coffee in hand, eyes tired but warm, only if they're ready to be found. He stepped into the room, glancing over the displays. They're sending a documentary crew. Want to do a feature on the archive. On you. Let them focus on the maps. They won't. She smiled faintly. I know. That afternoon, Eliza sat for an interview with a reporter from a veteran-focused media group, young, respectful, and clearly nervous. The first question was expected. What was the moment you knew you'd survived something no one would ever believe? She didn't answer right away. Then, when I realized no one would even ask. Later, he asked what the map on her back meant. It means someone mattered. Someone real. Someone who didn't get written down the first time. You? All of us. That night, she returned to the slate replica in the memorial exhibit. It was quiet. A weekday. Only 2 visitors stood nearby. A man in a VA jacket and a boy holding his hand. The man looked up as she approached. Recognition flickered. You're her, he said. The one who got out. The one who mapped the way. She didn't confirm. Didn't need to. The boy pointed at the compass etched into the slate. Did you get lost? Eliza crouched beside him. A little, but I found my way. Because of the tattoo? She thought about that. No, because I remembered. The tattoo just made sure no one else forgot. The boy nodded solemnly as if that made perfect sense. Outside, the wind was soft. Spring is coming late. She stood beneath the dim lights of the courtyard, the stars barely visible beyond the city haze. Maddox joined her again. They're planning to name the next archive annex after you, the Keene Annex. Tell them no. Why? Because the next person who walks in with a story no one believes deserves to feel like the room was waiting for them, not just for me. He nodded. They stood in silence for a while. Then Maddox asked, You think the old man in the village ever told anyone else what happened? No, then it dies with him. No, she said, it lived with him. That's enough. She pulled something from her pocket. A final sketch, done in pencil, isn't clean. The canyon is east of the ridge. The trail they never walked together. She handed it to Maddox. Add it to the archive. Label it witness unconfirmed. He took it. Still charting, she smiled, always. And behind them, inside the glowing archive, 73 maps waited for the next footprint and the next memory. It was a message again. No sender, no subject. Just a string of coordinates. Eliza Keene stared at it for a long time before cross-referencing the numbers with her archive. The coordinates weren't in any classified database, not military, not satellite tagged, but they were familiar, too familiar. She pulled out a worn copy of the map from Tubas. The ink had faded, but the memory hadn't. The numbers were close, but not identical to any of her original paths. A branch off the eastern ridge, a slope she'd avoided because it was too steep, too unstable at the time. No recon drone had ever flown low enough to confirm what was below. She stared at it for a while, then called Maddox. I got another trail. He didn't ask who sent it. You want backup? I want to go alone. He hesitated. You sure? Yes. 3 days later, she stood at the edge of a sandstone cliff, looking down into a jagged corridor carved by wind and time. It didn't appear on any official map, but her boots found it without hesitation. She followed the path down, moving slower now, her joints stiff with age, but her steps deliberate. Each turn in the slope matched the line she had received, a line only someone who had walked it or seen it could draw. 2 hours in, she reached a bend that opened into a shallow basin. No structures, no markers, just silence. And then she saw it, a rock, upright, flat-faced, etched crudely into the surface using what must have been a knife or metal shard, was a symbol. A compass, crude, imperfect, but unmistakably modeled after hers. Below it, just one word: echo. She stood in front of it for a long time, then sat, pulled out a sketch pad, began drawing, not the rock, but the space around it, the silence, the edges, the air. She drew the way the trail curved to protect the marker from the wind. She mapped the shadow's length. She noted the cracks that had started to grow along the base. Then she pulled out a sealed plastic slip. Inside, a single page, the letter she had written a year ago and never sent. To Rourke, to the man in the village, to the missing, to herself. She placed the slip beneath the stone, a quiet offering, and then she turned back. When she returned to the Pentagon, she said nothing for 2 days. She simply worked, catalogued, labeled the new trail, Echo East, status, memorial. She didn't include the marker. She left that out. Some maps weren't meant to be found by anyone but those who needed them. One evening, Maddox found her in the archive. She was organizing new entries. "You found something out there," he said. She didn't look up. "I found a place someone tried to remember. That's enough." He stepped closer. "You don't have to carry it all. I'm passing it on. That's the point." He nodded. They stood for a long moment. Then she pulled something from her drawer, a small leather-bound book. Her own field journal, the one she'd kept sealed since the first day she returned. She handed it to him. "You're the archive now," she said. Maddox hesitated. "You're not leaving, are you?" "I'm just walking a different trail." A month later, Eliza Keene stepped down from her post. There was no ceremony, only a small announcement. One paragraph in the internal bulletin. No title, no rank, just her name and the word completed. The archive continued. New stories came in, new maps, new ghosts. Her desk stayed empty. Her nameplate was never replaced, but taped beneath the drawer, someone later found a note written in her hand. "If you're reading this, you believe. That means you're ready." And next to it, a hand-drawn compass. One line extended off the edge of the paper, unfinished, waiting. 3 years later, they found another one. It was a trail. Not just footprints in the dust, but a full sequence. Heat residuals, interrupted airflow signatures, faint impact traces that could only be made by a human dragging one leg. A trail cut through a forgotten ravine in northern Syria, far from any official patrol grid. The recon team didn't understand what they were looking at until they overlaid the route with a scan from the Ghost Trail archive, and it matched almost exactly. The archive staff logged the discovery, attached metadata, and sent the alert to all active analysts. Within hours, the system flagged a potential connection. An entry authored in handwriting, a scan, page 214, from a leather-bound journal. Label Keene E. Maddox stood at the edge of the conference room, arms folded, as the younger analysts presented. He didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. They detailed the terrain overlay, the environmental degradation offset, and the echo patterns from the slope. When the lights came back on, he cleared his throat. "That page," he said, "she wrote it 6 weeks before stepping down. I remember because she made me promise not to read it unless it ever matched a live trace." No one spoke. Maddox walked forward slowly and touched the display. She called it a shadow corridor, said it was a place she saw once in a dream and then again in a satellite glitch. Said she couldn't tell if it was memory or hope. He looked out over the group. Send a team, carefully document everything. He paused, and this time, don't call it a simulation, call it a recovery. The site was difficult to reach. The terrain was brittle, fractured by wind and heat. The recovery team took 7 days to access the ravine safely. They found remnants first, a torn strap, a fractured metal clip, the outline of a body long decomposed but preserved in dust. No ID, no confirmed origin, but embedded into the rock wall nearby, barely scratched in, was a compass, smaller than the one Eliza used, but shaped the same. Next to it is the word trail. No one claimed authorship. No one needed to. The archive added it as Echo Shadow. They submitted a request for memorial confirmation. It passed. Maddox sat in the archive room late that night, staring at the last page of her journal. He had read it, finally. It said, if they find this place, it means memory has weight. If they never do, it means it still had meaning. He closed the book gently, and for the first time in years, he wept. Elsewhere, at the National Military Records Museum, a child stood before the replica slate. His father stood behind him, hand resting on the boy's shoulder. The boy whispered, "What does the compass point to?" The father smiled. To the people who never stopped walking. And somewhere far from the noise, on a quiet slope beneath a foreign sky, the wind passed over stone. It traced the lines carved into the wall, a shape, a circle, a mark, not a monument, just proof that someone had been there, and that they remembered. The years passed quietly. The archive never closed. It didn't need to. It wasn't just a room anymore. It was a pulse, spread across bases and academies, field units and satellites. What Eliza Keene had started now spanned continents. Her name wasn't always mentioned, but her method was. New cadets learned it under the Keene principle. Validate memory, map contradiction, trust the witness, even if their voice shakes. Simulation labs now had a new component, shadow zones. Areas are designed to be incomplete, waiting for field feedback. Cadets were trained to pause, to ask, what might we be missing? And sometimes they found something. Sometimes they remembered before forgetting began. On the 25th anniversary of the Ghost Trail Archive, a special session was held. Small, private, no cameras, just 30 people in a room overlooking the Potomac. Maddox sat near the window, older now, slower, but his posture was still straight. In his lap, a sealed black folder. Inside, Eliza's last recorded entry. He had read it 100 times, but today he would read it aloud. He opened the folder. The room went still. He began, "You may never know the names of those who kept walking. You may never see the maps they carried. But if you reach a place that feels impossible and yet familiar, stop, look down. Someone has already walked it, and someone left it marked." He paused, cleared his throat. Not all trails are drawn in ink. Some are traced in silence, some in scars. The final line was almost illegible, but if you find your way back, leave a mark. After the reading, a young analyst approached him. "Sir," she said, "was she ever officially honored?" Maddox gave a small smile. She asked that nothing be done until the archive had outlived every rank attached to it. The analyst frowned. "And has it?" He nodded. "As of this morning." She paused. "Then what happens now?" He handed her the folder. "You decide." 3 months later, a memorial was installed. Not in a cemetery, not in a hall, but at the edge of a canyon in the high desert of western Utah. No fanfare, just a plaque, half buried in sandstone. It read, "In honor of those who mapped in silence." Beneath it, the replica of a compass's needle is fixed, but its lines open, waiting for someone else to walk forward. Meanwhile, the archive continued to grow. By its 30th year, the Ghost Trail archive had logged over 9,400 validated paths. Nearly 1,000 previously missing service members had been located, reclassified, or honored properly because of memory-based contradiction maps. Of those, 113 were traced back to personal journals, 47 to fragments of spoken memory, 11 to drawings done under duress, 1 to a tattoo on a spine. One case in particular sparked renewed attention. An old envelope surfaced in a retirement community in Maine. Inside, a folded paper with hand-drawn marks and a partial military insignia. A nurse found it in the personal effects of a veteran who died without family. The nurse submitted it to the archive. The trail it showed had no match, until one analyst found a near-identical slope in a mission debrief filed 47 years earlier, which was redacted and shelved. The match was uncanny. Maddox, now retired, but still an advisor, was called in. He confirmed the symbol in the corner. Not standard, but familiar. A compass. This one is drawn with softer edges, and a note beneath it, Echo Relay. The search took 2 years. The terrain was remote, harsh, deep in the Andes. But when they found it, they found more than proof. They found 4 names. 3 were listed as Kia. 1 had never been named at all. The recovered remains were buried with full honors. And the anonymous one, their marker bore one word: witness. The new director of the archive, a woman named Carmen Velasquez, once said in a speech, "The job is not to be right, it's to remember." Her words were inscribed on the lobby wall of the new Central Archive facility, completed in the archive's 35th year. The facility was named Echo Field. At the back of Echo Field was a small room, quiet, undisturbed. Inside, a single desk, and on it, encased in glass, the original map drawn by Eliza Keene. The ink is barely legible now, but visible. Next to it, a compass, and below it, engraved into the glass, "Still walking." In the weeks after the Echo Field inauguration, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived. It was addressed simply to the curator of memory. The envelope was hand-folded from weathered navigation chart paper, the kind used before digital overlays became standard. The ink was faded, but the writing was deliberate. Inside, a single sentence: "Some trails are walked twice, once to survive and once to forgive." No return address, no signature, but in the bottom corner, a small hand-drawn emblem. The same compass that had once been etched into Eliza Keene's back. This one, imperfectly drawn. Shaky lines, different ink, but unmistakable. Carmen Velasquez called Maddox immediately. He didn't answer. She left a message: "It's happening again, come see." When he arrived, she didn't say a word, just handed him the envelope. He read it twice. Then he asked one question: "Do you think it's her?" Carmen shook her head. "I think it's someone who knew her, or someone who followed." She handed him a folder. Inside were printouts, terrain scans, and a satellite photo tagged from 6 weeks earlier. It showed a figure walking alone in a remote corridor of the Zagros Mountains. "We don't know who," she said, "but the route aligns with Eliza's notes, ones we never published." The new team didn't call it a mission, they called it a pilgrimage. And when they returned, they brought back fragments, pieces of a leather strap, an empty compass casing, and a small vial of sand. Inside the vial was a rolled note. It read, "Map what doesn't want to be found." That phrase became the new unofficial motto of the archive. Cadets began referring to it as the sand line. It was added to the wall at Echo Field beneath the original compass. "Map what doesn't want to be found. Remember what you didn't want to be remembered. And walk even when no one follows." Years passed again. Visitors came by the hundreds. Veterans, families, survivors, and those who had no one left, but still carried maps no one had asked for. One day, a child traced the glass over Eliza's map with a gloved finger. The tour guide asked if he had any questions. The boy said, "Is this a story or real?" The guide replied, "Both. But the parts that hurt the most, those are usually the real." On the 50th anniversary of the war game that started it all, a new exhibit was added, a full recreation of the original operations room. Everything as it had been, except one chair was left empty. In front of it, a plaque that read, "Sometimes the clearest path is seen from silence. No name, no rank, just silence." That same night, Carmen stood on the observation deck, looking out over the rows of lighted panels. A journalist asked her, "What do you think she would say if she saw all this?" Carmen didn't turn, she just smiled. She'd probably point to the corner we forgot to label and ask, "What are we still missing?" Echo Field remains open, not just to the public, but to stories. It accepts no accolades, issues no corrections, offers no certainty, only direction. At the edge of the canyon, the compass still stands, still fixed, still waiting for someone to walk forward, not to finish a story, but to start the next one. And beneath the sandstone, if you listen close, the trail hums back, still walking. Some stories don't end, they just echo. And this one, Eliza's story, never asked to be told. It resisted the spotlight, defied ceremony, and preferred to be traced in dirt, ink, and silence. But it was never truly silent. Every cadet who stopped before the replica of that operations room and stared at the empty chair, they heard something, not words, not instructions, but the gravity of absence, the weight of what had gone unspoken for decades. Eliza Keene didn't leave behind a legacy of medals or rank. She left questions, maps, gaps, and the courage to face them, because what good is strategy if it forgets the human cost? What good is a command if it refuses to listen to those who endured the consequences? Eliza taught them to listen, not just to survivors, but to contradictions, to shadows, to inconsistencies that others might dismiss as weakness or irrelevance. She showed them that sometimes truth only survives in fragments, and sometimes the map you ignore is the one that gets people killed. The Ghost Trail Archive was never about fixing the past. It was about making sure the future didn't erase it. That's why her story matters, not because it's exceptional, but because it was nearly lost, buried beneath arrogance, oversight, and the toxic pride of people who thought silence was safer. But she remembered, and she walked, and she made room for others to walk too. Now you've walked with her, through war games and war zones, through scars and satellites, through memory and mission. You've seen how a single tattoo, misunderstood, mocked, became the key to an entire trail of truth. You've watched her endure ridicule, shoulder old ghosts, and quietly dismantle a legacy of oversight with nothing more than her own story and a spine that refused to stay still. So what now? What do we do with the trail she left? Maybe it's not about finishing it. Maybe it's about choosing to walk forward, even if the path looks uncertain. Maybe the lesson isn't to follow, but to trace your own, carefully, bravely, and with just enough silence to hear what others forgot to say. Somewhere out there beyond Echo Field, beyond Utah's desert canyons and Pentagon sublevels, someone is still carrying a story. It might be written in coordinates, it might be drawn in charcoal, it might be burned into the skin, and it might never be believed unless someone like you decides to stop, ask, and listen. So if you found something today, a question, a memory, a moment that didn't leave you, leave a mark. And if you've walked a trail that others tried to erase, you were never alone. You're part of the map now. Thank you for watching this journey unfold. We hope Eliza's story moved you, challenged you, maybe even unsettled you, as all important truths should. If you have stories of your own, our memories worth mapping, we'd love to hear them. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what paths you think still need to be remembered. This is Veteran Biker, where silence speaks and legacy is never left behind. Subscribe now to join us on the next trail, because someone, somewhere, is still walking, and they just might need you to notice.